Now, the casting process would have taken place below the furnace. Now, what kind of iron does an iron furnace make? Does anybody know what it's called?
Pig iron.
Pig iron. It's called pig iron because you're trying to keep this furnace running with, you start out with, you get some charcoal in there and get it burning, and then you throw a little layer of iron ore, maybe some more charcoal, throw some flux in there, and so you have a formula that the iron master gets used to using based on the materials that he has. Now, if it's a rainy, wet day, and he said, I might need a little more charcoal today, it's just kind of damp. He gets a good supply of iron ore in that's got higher iron in it. He says, well, that's good, but I got richer ore. I need a little bit more flux with that, or I need less flux. And so he'd always be adjusting it, but he's going to try and get that thing going for like 12 hours, okay? So he keeps feeding in the top, and everything's getting molten down at the bottom. The charcoal is burning, and it's got so much carbon in it that it's pulling the oxygen out of the iron ore and leaving molten iron in the bottom. It's called a reducing chemistry that happens there. Okay, you're not burning the iron ore. You're actually, the gases and the burning of the charcoal at those temperatures will pull the oxygen out of iron ore, because iron ore is basically rust. Okay, if you pull, and rust is something that's oxidized. So you basically, the mineral limonite is the element iron, Fe, and then oxides and hydroxides, O and OHs and stuff like that. And so you're trying to pull those O's and OHs away from the iron and leave just the Fe. And so you've got to do that in a reducing environment using something like charcoal. Later on they used coal. And so that's happening over a 12-hour period in this iron furnace, okay? And then you've got the air blowing in it, and it's hot in there. And then after 12 hours, the furnace master, well, he thinks it's about ready. So he's going to take a long iron pole, and he would have plugged the bottom of the furnace with some clay. So he'd poke out the thing, and he's got molten iron there. It would run out by gravity, and it would start filling each of these things. And it's called pig iron because it's like a bunch of piglets who are nursing in the barn, okay? And the middle of it's called the sow. That piece in the middle that comes out is called the sow. Now, it's possible digging here. There's this magnetic spot here. There could be a big fat sow, an iron sow sitting there. Sometimes they call them salamanders, or just the big chunk of iron that kind of was in front of the furnace that developed there over time, okay? But generally, you would run it out, you'd make these pigs, and after they cooled, cast iron is actually very brittle, so you can just hit it with a hammer, and you can, I've got a 30-pound pig, or a 100-pound pig, or a 300-pound pig, depending on how size you want them. That pig iron is then something that can go to a blacksmith or a foundry or forge, and then they can further hammer it or beat it and remelt it and make it into things. So that's all done in the casting floor. Now, a lot of times they would try and figure out, okay, if I want to make a cannonball, how do you make a cannonball when you got this molten stuff coming out, okay? Well, they would take sand and they would put it into mold boxes, and they'd have a wooden mold. Anybody ever seen casting done of wax or any kind of thing that's cast? Or cement, okay? You have two halves of maybe framed like this. And so you might have one that you can make a half-dozen cannonballs. And so you have good foundry sand in there, and you pack it all in there, and then you put your a wooden cannonball in there, and you pack it all around it, and you make two different halves of this thing, and then you put that together, but the sand's holding its own, so you've got a void in there where that wooden thing was, that's now just an open space. And of course you have a little channel that's kind of drilled in there, and then you would take molten iron that's coming out of the furnace, okay, and pour it through the hole, and it would go in and fill that and make a cannonball. Now the cannonball that came out, those two halves, and you can feel it in some of the ones that you have, they might not be perfectly together. If you've ever tried, if anybody ever seen one of those, my daughter has one of those snowball makers that you kind of squeeze together. But you never get a perfectly round one because there's always that ridge there, right? Because you're really taking two halves, okay? Same thing would happen here. They could kind of grind and knock that off in the place where the iron came in. It wouldn't be a perfect cannonball, but hey, it doesn't need to be a perfect cannonball. You're just hurling a hunk of iron at somebody, right? So that's how they would cast all these different sizes of cannonballs here. Pots are done the same way, and that's probably a pretty difficult process. A lot of times, if it didn't go just right, if your mold wasn't right, your sand wasn't right, the thing would if your mold collapsed on you or the stuff didn't fill it completely, then you'd have a thin spot in your big cast iron pot, and it would break on you, or it wouldn't work. Now, what would you use a big cast iron pot for at that time? Cooking. Okay. What else? What's that? Yeah, you boil. But you do a lot. You start doing your old-fashioned homemade chemistry. Okay. You would boil wood ashes to get the lye out, so that you could make your lye soap. Okay. You'd be boiling waxberry plants and stuff to get your waxes to make candles. I mean, when you get these big pots, you could do a lot of different things with them. You could even boil your wood ashes mixed with animal urine and boil it down and get potassium nitrate to mix with charcoal and a little bit of sulfur to make gunpowder. Okay? All these forgotten, lost arts were things that people did at the time, and it sort of started, they needed that big cauldron to start with, right? And where are you going to get one? You're not going to haul one from Philadelphia. How many of you guys like carrying things uphill? You like carrying heavy objects uphill? No, okay. If you're going to carry it, which way do you want to carry it? Downhill, okay? One of the cheapest forms of energy that you're ever going to find is what? Gravity, okay? So, when they brought stuff to do in this furnace, and the stuff gets fed in the top of the furnace, you want to do that, if you're using a horse and wagon and your own brute strength, you want to make that as easy as possible. And you only want to do it one time, okay? So, you have these gentle sloping ramps or roads that come into the top of the furnace where you can bring in a wagon, okay? You know, you don't want to pile your iron ore down here in the bottom and then say, oh man, now I got to haul it back and put it in the furnace. Now, why don't we find big furnace stones here? Why don't you find any big furnace stones? They recycled back then. You know, we think we're the only ones that recycle. We recycle our aluminum cans and our plastic bottles and our newspapers and just everything. Back then, when times were tough, they recycled everything. If you had a nail that got bent, and you straighten it out and still use it. You don't throw it away. Now, we've become such a throwaway society. But back then, you know, as soon as this furnace was abandoned, if the landowner didn't reuse or sell those stones from the furnace, okay, or even the bricks, I bet you it started disappearing right away. Because people come down the road and they say, you know, I need to do a cornerstone for my house, and they would take one. I've seen railroad track stringers recycled into a furnace that was recycled into an ice house. I mean, a good building stone, it's certainly easier to use one that's already made, even to haul it around, than to go make one, okay? So that's one of the reasons you don't find, you know, anything here. It's been used. Whatever was needed, hey, there's stone that's been quarried once and built into something once. It's easier to reuse it than to go start from scratch. And so now, but a lot of times what happens, it's the stuff at the base, the stuff near the bottom. At some point, when people have recycled all the easy parts of the furnace, there's stuff underneath that sort of gets a couple layer of leaves on it. A little bit, the poison ivy starts going in. Right? There wouldn't be an archaeological dig here in Pennsylvania if there wasn't poison ivy. Okay? That all comes in, and people stop picking up those pieces. And so what you've got a good chance of is while you're hunting for that floor level down here, is a lot of times all the stuff above ground is gone, but that substructure foundation, all the stuff at the bottom, you're likely to find. I mean, maybe you'll find a piece of the furnace that was a broken stone that somebody said, I'm not using that in my barn. But you might recognize that, hey, it was a broken stone, okay? And so you're finding broken pieces of stuff. You're not finding whole things. Because if it was whole, it still had utility, people are going to use it somewhere. You're looking at the impression that's left. You're doing your archaeology of this industrial site to try and see what you can find evidence of. And so far, you're finding, you never know what you're going to find, but you're finding things kind of where you would expect them to be, but you don't know what that next shovelful is going to bring up, you know? And so there's still more to be found. There's good stuff, and you don't know what ended up where. The site's been disturbed over 200 years, but it's a neat site. It's neat, and to believe it's here on this road and people drive by it all the time and have no clue. You guys are at another very special place. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnny.